About 8 years ago, I finally moved away from Canada, the country where I was born and raised, for good. So I departed, and I would actually never move back, at least not to this point in time, to my home country. Now, I had previously gone and I'd lived in the US briefly, I had lived in Costa Rica, and so I'd kind of had a little bit of experience with that, as well as some international travel. But this was the kind of final time when I ultimately ended up selling everything, getting rid of my home, getting rid of my car, all this sort of stuff, and moving away. And in fact, over the next little period, I would have a period where I spent absolutely zero time at all in Canada for about 3 years. And, if you're somebody who's in that situation where you're thinking about moving away from a country, it can be, I would say, a little bit intimidating, right? Maybe a little bit, there's some uncertainty, some fear, this sort of thing. I was talking to my brother the other day, and he was mentioning how maybe he would have benefited if he was more willing to kind of take some of these jumps, move to someplace different, pursue a different option in terms of the companies that he's working for, etc. And so, we all have our different ways, but I figured I would explain to you a little bit about my process going through that experience, what it was like for me, principally emotionally, although in the actual practical experience as well, and therefore, and kind of what it has been like over those 8 years and looking back 8 years later, how I feel about that. So if that's of interest to you, let's dive in and talk about it. As I was mentioning, I'm originally from Canada. I was born from an early age there. When I was graduated high school, I moved to the US briefly. Then I moved back to Canada. Then I was in Costa Rica for basically the winters and a little bit in the US back and forth. And in 2017, I had kind of been planning and thinking about the possibility that I would maybe move somewhere abroad. And so I was in this business. I was helping people do international tax, helping them to set up their companies in other countries, do international banking, that sort of thing. I was aware of a bunch of the different advantages that came with living abroad. However, I hadn't fully taken that jump. And what ultimately led to that was I visited Eastern Europe, a place where, this particular area, basically the Balkans area. So Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, Bulgaria, Romania, etc. I had not been visited up until that point in time, and checked it out. And I ultimately met the woman who is now my wife. And so for me, that was something that helped to push me over the edge. Now I, had legitimately considered kind of moving there. I was already in a situation where I was employing people internationally actually for quite a few years. I'd had freelancers, etc. I had kind of challenged myself over quite a long period of time to learn to work remotely. And so I was pretty familiar with that part of things. But the actual process of getting rid of your stuff, which, let's be clear, there's sort of an emotional attachment, right? I had a bed that I had spent a long time researching mattresses and getting something that I was really happy with. Spent time finding a TV that I was really happy with, a desk chair I was really happy with, a blender that I was really happy. Simple things that might not seem like a big deal when you kind of think of it, but they're like your stuff. You've kind of built a life. And then I'm fairly close with my family, and so my family were not going to be coming with me to these places. I have all these friends, and I was moving to an area of the world where I really didn't have a lot of friendships and connections. And so the question is like, well, what would make you do that? And I think the first thing was, there was just more benefits in terms of business, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of opportunities. There were things about Canada that I was, not so happy with anymore. I felt like the culture was shifting in a way that was sort of anti-entrepreneurship. I felt a little bit like it was not serving me so well in that regard. I also was in a situation where I'd be able to be exposed to other business opportunities. The costs of employing people and building a team and doing things were meaningfully lower if you were to go and look at some of these other areas. The tax treatment was meaningfully better. But as I said, probably the biggest thing that kind of tipped the scales, I probably would have, dragged my feet a little bit longer if I hadn't met the woman who was now my wife. And so I met her in Belgrade in Serbia. And so initially the move was to go to Serbia. That was kind of the first place, was where she was. She couldn't come to Canada because it was very difficult to get visas at the time. And I had gone through enough relationship experiences where I sort of knew that finding somebody who you're really happy to be with is already pretty tough. And so then you're wanting, if you find somebody who's good, like, how do you make it work? I want to try and remove as many obstacles from making it work as possible. And it turned out that one of those was, hey, if there's a requirement that that person is where I am, this might be an issue. Or if I try to make it long distance, that's kind of an issue. So I'd said, hey, listen, I'm either going to move that person to where I am, or I'm going to move to be where they are. That's what I'm going to do. And so this started a few year process of us. We'd kind of be based in one place, but then we'd spend, about half the year traveling, going to different places. Really wonderful, right? We got to see lots of different parts of the world. We, met all sorts of people, had tons of great experiences. So, wonderful thing, but you don't know that when you're getting started. And so for me, what I knew was I was coming to a place that I was like fairly uncomfortable. I didn't speak the language. I didn't, as I said, have a lot of connections. The wonderful thing was that I had her, and so she was connected there. I did have some friends who were kind of previously in that area, and so when I visited, I made some other friends. I'd had somebody who I'd previously employed, and so they were there. So there was like a little bit of a connection, but not a lot. And it was shortly thereafter that we moved to Bulgaria. And that was kind of based on a few different, again, sort of similar factors where we say, okay, well, we need to have residency someplace. We want a place that's kind of business friendly. At the same time, where is it that kind of makes sense for everyone? And she was a little bit concerned that, well, this is a new relationship. If things don't work out well, then, I want to be close to my home so I can go back home. She's from Montenegro. And so that was pretty easy. So it was like, we weren't going to go to Panama or Thailand or something on that basis, although we did consider places like those. And this led to the whole shift to Bulgaria, which was kind of the main base for a period of a few years prior to, I was spending kind of winters in Asia, uh, summers-ish in Bulgaria, and then eventually relocated to UAE as kind of my main base, with then traveling to Europe and North America, a little bit Asia, etc. Over the periods when it's not quite as attractive in UAE. So that process, I think, you have to think about, well, where are you going to go? And I visited these places in advance, so I did know a little bit about what it was like. I made quite a point to network. I really think this is like a super, super, super important thing. To me anyway, if if I feel socially isolated, that's going to be really hard to sustain. And so when I got to Bulgaria, for example, I would be making a lot of point of connecting with local entrepreneurs. And I would ask friends who I knew if they knew people who were in that area and to connect me and build a network. And the interesting thing is you don't need to build that much of a network, okay? If you have like 5 close friends who you get along well with, you can spend time with, you have a great relationship, you connect well, you have a lot in common, like that gives you a lot, a lot. So that was sort of my objective. By the way, if you're interested in kind of this type of thing, we put together a little guide on 10 places that you can go that are low cost. So you'll have a situation where you can kind of benefit from lower cost of living, including lower taxes in a lot of cases, as well as high quality of life. And so you can check it out in the link below. It's something that we're offering as part of kind of we're going to work on building a community for you guys, etc. And so feel free to check that out. It goes through a bunch of details of 10 of the different places that are pretty attractive across many, many of different art clients. You can kind of think of where do they go, where do they like, where do they stay. We've kind of cataloged some of it in there for you, along with some of the things you might want to know in terms of taxes, in terms of residencies, in terms of the types of places that you may want to move in those areas. And so feel free to check that out. As I said, there's a link below, and you can download that for free. So anyway, moving on. What I was then thinking was, well, I wanted to have a place that the cost of living were low enough that it was not my forever place. Okay, like I kind of knew going there. And I think this is like a really important mindset for a person to have. I sometimes have people call and, deal with us. We do consulting with people all the time about where should you relocate? How do you optimize your taxes? What kind of banking do you need? What kind of companies should you set up, etc. And when we're doing that, sometimes people have almost like a forever mindset to it. And I think it's really, really important to realize that the place that you go today does not need to be a forever place. You can change. Like literally in a fairly short period of time, I went from Canada to Serbia, Serbia to Bulgaria. And we could have changed from Bulgaria probably sooner than we did. But because of the fact that we were spending winters in Asia anyway, and we kind of had things set up there and enjoyed things there, it wasn't as necessary to move in a big rush. And so, but we were planning that from the beginning. We were kind of planning from the beginning that Bulgaria will not be forever. Okay, it's not the ideal place. But what is great about it is it's a stepping stone where if we're not going to be there anyway, do I want to spend $5,000 or $10,000 a month on a place that's going to sit empty for half of the year? No, that doesn't really sound very appealing to me. So I can have a relatively good quality of life when I'm there. I can go and I can be productive and I can work and, I can build some friendships, and it kind of is a pretty well connected place by air. That's very cool. Off we go. So some of the things though that I found a little bit, I don't know, like, I guess in my head there were things that I really appreciated about my home where I was coming from. And these are often simple things, right? They might be restaurants that I'm really familiar with and like. They might be activities that I'm used to. They might be the gym that I go to. They might be all this sort of stuff. And to be fair, like, I never found a gym in Bulgaria that I liked as much as my gyms in Canada. That was just the way that it went. The way that they have grocery stores in Canada, I prefer to the way they have grocery stores in most of Europe. It's just kind of a different feel to it. Although, usually it's fairly comparable in terms of what you can get, depending on which grocery store it is, etc. It's just a different feel. I'm used to wide roads, and in Europe, that's not the norm, right? Just like thing after thing after thing that is just like, it doesn't feel comfortable at first because it's not familiar, because it's not what I'm used to. It's not what I've gone through, right? And so at first, I kind of, I don't want to say longed for home, but I had this sense of, oh, there were these things that were much better back at home. And I went through a really interesting experience. And that interesting experience was the things that I sort of reflected on being quite good prior to leaving. When I returned, I found weren't that good by and large. And a really simple example is the weather. When growing up in Canada, I had this idea like, oh, the summers are great. And I remember the first year that I took my wife to Canada, it was early August, and I was in Edmonton, one of the cities in Western Canada, and it was like 5 degrees Celsius. And I'm like, what the hell is this? This is terrible. Why would anyone be here? This is awful. Like, this is not good in the summer. And so that was like an interesting experience because I had not processed it that way prior to leaving. I've talked to a variety of different friends and discussed how I didn't realize how small the thinking was until leaving. Like the economic opportunities, the scale of thought, etc., were just meaningfully better when I left the country versus kind of the bubble that I was in before I left the country. That was really interesting. A lot of the things that I thought I would miss and I thought were really good, I found like there was sort of an equivalent to it outside of the country that was everybody's good or better. So a simple example might be I grew up near the Rocky Mountains. They're beautiful. Like I love the mountains. They're really wonderful. And I thought, oh, the Rockies are like some of the best mountains in the world, which I mean, they're great. However, you know what? The Dolomites are also really great. And the Alps are also really great. And you can go and find a variety of different other mountain ranges that are also really great. And so you're like, all right, well, like, is that big a deal? I would maybe go in the summers to a cabin on the lake, and you think, oh, like this is kind of nice. You've got water sports, etc. But then in these other parts, I can go and be in the Mediterranean near Sardinia or something like that, or I can be in Maldives, or I can be in Thailand or something like that. And it's like, this is way better water. This is like a much better experience. What are we talking about here? Like I said, the weather is obviously one. Food, there are like some little things that I actually still like from Canada food-wise. I think they're like very, very isolated. But by and large, I kind of found, hey, look, I could find food that I really liked in these other areas. And what that took was it took going through a process of immersing myself in that country and trying out different things and then building familiarity with those things and coming to the point where it's like, well, these are actually normal and wonderful. And then I go to Canada to visit and I'm kind of missing the things that I have in Europe or in Asia or now in UAE. And, I'm really blessed that at this stage I've been to many, many parts of the world, fairly well traveled. And I've lived in a bunch of different parts of the world. And I have the capability to travel to most parts of the world or live in some part of the world if I chose. And So it's almost like, why would I go to something that is sort of normal? I was there because I was born there. And I appreciate the experiences I had going through that time, but I will probably never move back. And I don't know how long it took me to come to that realization, maybe like 3 or so years, but somewhere in there, I kind of got this idea of, yeah, I will probably never move back. Almost everything that I really liked about that place, I have a better version of outside of that place. I've made great friends. I can continue to have great friends. People from Canada can come and visit me. I can go and visit them. And it's just a new life. I've kind of formed that. And yes, it helps that I had my wife, and, so you have somebody to travel with, and you have somebody who you're sharing your life with, and you can go through things together, and you kind of have this natural support structure. And then when you stack on that, local friends who you make, and then you still keep in contact with the people back home. I'm like pretty good as somebody who will make sure that I call my family pretty regularly, have a conversation with them. I'll message lots on WhatsApp or things like that, so that I stay in touch with the people that I love. And so I don't need to be there all the time in person. And then I look forward to the times that I spend with them. But guess what? One of the things that's super interesting is when I go back, I'm in a situation where, because of the fact that it's kind of, I'm not there all the time, I don't take them for granted, the time is almost more precious, and I almost make better use of it as a result. And I think that's really wonderful. So I guess what I would say to anyone who's considering it is, yes, there will be things that are different. I think for me, kind of language discomforts in Eastern Europe, like there's always a little bit of friction, and that's just not as nice. And you can say, oh my gosh, you're so entitled that people should. No, I don't think that you should have to learn my language. And I think to the extent that I am in places that I really consider long term, I'm quite happy to learn some of the language. But there's always this friction if you're not fluent versus if you are. And it, to me, makes it feel a little bit less like home. So one of the reasons why I like some place like Malaysia, some place like UAE, etc., is because of the fact that there is, like, I'm familiar language-wise. English is like a normal language that pretty much everybody speaks. And so it's easy to navigate. It kind of takes away that friction. It can feel a bit more like home than I would get if I go to the grocery store and I'm struggling to communicate with the person, or you take a taxi and struggling to communicate with the person. And then at the flip side, there are lots of benefits if you're willing to make it beneficial. So for me, those were, like I said, just better opportunities, easier of doing business, new business opportunities that I could have, new people that I could meet, gaining a global perspective, getting to enjoy better weather and different cultures and different cuisine, and on and on and on. So I would really encourage you, if it is something that you're considering, to go and check out some of these places. As I said, we've got this guide if you want to look at some of the places that might be good for you. And if you would like some specific assistance with where to go, what types of residency programs you need to navigate, how that will work for taxes, what about exit tax, what about some sort of international corporate structure, etc., you can reach out to us. You can book a call with me, calendly.com/Michael-Rosmer, link in the description below, or you can send a message through offshorecitizen.net. Again, you can follow to our website and click and send an inquiry through there. But I hope that you're able to kind of take a journey. I always encourage people at least to go travel, right? At least go and check out these places and see what it's like. And then you can take baby steps. You can say, all right, I'm going to go and get myself a bank account in this place. I'm going to return to a place a few times, which I do think is like a really, really valuable lesson, is that the first time you go to some place, it will not feel like home, of course, because it's your first time there. It's very, very rare that somebody steps in there like, this is it. But as you return to a place 3 and 4 times, you start to miss things about it when you leave, and it starts to feel a bit more like home. So that's like something that not many people, I think, are in a position where they think about doing that much, but it really helps as you kind of accustom yourself to a given place and you start to develop that. The last thing I would say is, make sure you invest in the relationship side. There's a lot of ways to connect with people today. You can do so through Facebook groups, there's various different communities, there's different expat groups, etc., and it will make all the difference in the world. So I hope that helps, and I will look forward to seeing you on the next video.